This chart compares Allied and Axis GDP, oil reserves, and manpower across the war. The bars for the Allies dwarf the Axis by almost every metric. The conclusion feels obvious. Allied victory was inevitable. But wind the clock back to early 1942, and that mathematical certainty falls apart. At that moment, the Axis actually held a commanding advantage. Germany dominated continental Europe from the Atlantic coast deep into Soviet territory. Japan controlled the Pacific and Southeast Asia. The Allies were isolated, divided, and bleeding territory by the day. If victory was determined entirely by pure math, why didn't the Axis win right then? Historian Richard Overy points out that any rational observer in 1942 would bet against the Allies. The outcome of the war was absolutely not predetermined. The Allies eventually won, but they won because of a drastic difference in how the two sides actually thought about manufacturing, leadership, and survival. The German military approached manufacturing with an artisan mindset. Their production philosophy prioritized craft tradition, absolute perfection, and constant design refinement. This is a visualization of their engineering approach. At one point during the war, Germany had 425 completely different aircraft models in simultaneous production. Their engineers built exceptional, technologically superior machines. But because every factory line required custom parts and constant retooling, those machines were rarely available in the numbers actually needed on the battlefield. The Soviets took an aggressive axe to their blueprints. They stripped their core aircraft production down to exactly 5 standardized types. They took extreme measures to maintain that output. Soviet planners literally dismantled entire factories ahead of the German advance, loaded them onto trains, and rebuilt them east of the Ural Mountains to churn out identical munitions without interruption. American planners adopted the same brutal efficiency. At peak, Ford's bomber plant in Michigan pushed a completed B-24 off the assembly line every 63 minutes. When fighting an industrial conflict across multiple continents, a philosophy of blunt force volume consistently defeats a philosophy of bespoke perfection. How an army structures its leadership dictates how quickly it can adapt to reality on the ground. Intoxicated by his early successes, Adolf Hitler highly centralized his command. When competent generals disagreed with his assessments, he fired them, replacing military expertise with his own ego. In 1942, against direct military advice, he micromanaged the division of German forces in Russia. He ordered one group toward the Caucasus oil fields and another toward Stalingrad, a decision that proved disastrous. The Allies relied on a messy, contentious committee approach. Roosevelt and Churchill surrounded themselves with meritocratic military staffs and actually delegated the physical conduct of the war to them. Even Joseph Stalin, a brutally paranoid autocrat who gutted his own officer corps before the war, recognized that he had to step back from direct operational control. He gave capable field commanders like Georgy Zhukov genuine latitude to plan and execute complex operations. The Allies built structures that could tolerate dissent, learn from early mistakes, and recover. An autocracy built entirely around one man's instinct cannot do that. By 1941, German forces had pushed hundreds of miles into Russian territory. The ideological promise of Soviet communism was failing to motivate a starving, retreating population. So Stalin completely pivoted. He rebranded the conflict as the Great Patriotic War, invoking pre-revolutionary Russian heroes, and quietly revived the long-suppressed Russian Orthodox Church to give the population a familiar source of resilience. Across the Atlantic, the situation was equally desperate. The Allied supply chain delivering critical goods from America to Britain was incredibly fragile. That supply chain didn't survive because of endless ships. It survived because of a razor-thin intelligence advantage. Codebreakers cracking the Enigma ciphers directly saved an estimated 421 merchant ships from destruction. To survive the darkest days of the conflict, the Allies dropped rigid ideologies and relied on whatever practical tools kept the war effort alive, whether that was religious patriotism or advanced code-breaking. Let's look again at that economic data from the start of the video, showing massive Allied GDP and industrial output in 1945. Those towering numbers did not create the victory. The ability to generate those numbers was the reward for building adaptable, efficient systems over the previous 3 years. Raw materials and millions of citizens represent potential power. that potential is completely useless unless you possess the practical structures to translate it into physical combat power. In 1942, the margin for error was almost non-existent. Victory was earned by the side that chose pragmatic volume, delegated authority, and adaptable systems over the illusion of rigid perfection.